The morning of the 20th call started like every other morning on Cedarwood Lane. Coffee brewing, birds in the elm trees, the distant hum of a lawn mower 2 streets over. Sergeant First Class Marcus Elijah Webb, United States Army Rangers, retired, was sitting on his front porch in a blue canvas chair, the same chair he'd sat in every morning for 6 years, watching the sun come up over the rooftops of Fairview Heights, Georgia. He had a yellow legal pad on his knee. He had a pen behind his ear. And he had 19 pages of notes, dates, times, badge numbers, incident report numbers, going all the way back to a Tuesday morning in April of 2021. His neighbor, Diane Colette Hartwell, was already on her phone. He could see her through the white slats of her porch railing, her silk robe, her freshly blown-out hair, the way she paced when she talked, short, tight little circles like a dog who couldn't settle. He heard the words before she'd finished dialing. "Yes, I need to report a suspicious individual." Marcus Webb didn't look up from his legal pad. He just turned to a fresh page and wrote the number 20. Let me tell you about Fairview Heights. Not the Fairview Heights you'd find on a real estate listing, though you'd find a good one. 4-bedroom colonials starting in the high 300s, good schools, a farmer's market every Saturday, a 4th of July parade that still draws a crowd. I'm talking about the real Fairview Heights, the one that smells like pine sap and somebody's grandmother's banana bread on Sunday afternoons, the one where kids still ride bikes until the streetlights come on, where Mr. Patterson across the street keeps a flag out year-round, and Mrs. Okonkwo on the corner grows collard greens in raised beds along her driveway and leaves bags of them on people's porches in September. No note, just the greens. Cedarwood Lane specifically, a quiet, curving street in the eastern part of the neighborhood, was the kind of block where people actually knew each other's names. Not just first names, last names, kids' names, dog names. The Hendersons at 4408 had a 13-year-old beagle named Captain who wandered into everyone's yards and nobody minded. The Torres family at 4412 had twin boys, age 9, who mowed lawns for $5 each on Saturdays and saved every penny. Old Mr. Delaney at 4416 had lived on the street since 1987 and told the same 4 stories at every block party, and everyone listened every time like it was the first. This was the kind of street people moved to on purpose. This was the kind of street that took a long time to build. And in the spring of 2021, something moved into 4414 Cedarwood Lane that this street had never seen before. But we'll get to that. First, let me tell you about the man at 4410. Sergeant First Class Marcus Elijah Webb. Retired United States Army, 75th Ranger Regiment. 24 years of service, 1994 to 2018. He enlisted at 18, fresh out of Decatur, Georgia, with a duffel bag and a mother who pressed his clothes the night before and didn't sleep. He went through basic at Fort Benning, passed Ranger School on his first attempt, something less than half of all candidates managed to do. He deployed to Somalia in 95, Kosovo in 99, Afghanistan in 2002, 2004, and 2008, Iraq in 2006 and 2010. He came home from all of them. Not without cost. His left knee had a titanium plate in it from a vehicle rollover outside Kandahar in 2008. He wore a brace on cold mornings. He walked with a slight hitch on stairs. On bad weather days, the deep cold Georgia winters that weren't supposed to happen anymore but kept coming, he moved a little slower and never complained about it. He had a Bronze Star with Valor, 2 Army Commendation Medals, a Combat Infantryman badge. He kept them in a shadow box his daughter made for him, which hung in his study on the back wall, not the front wall. He didn't need anyone walking through his front door to see it. He knew what it meant. He was 51 years old in the spring of 2021. Broad-shouldered, close-cropped gray at the temples, with the kind of posture that comes from a lifetime of someone telling you to stand up straight until you forget how to do anything else. He wore simple clothes, khaki pants, solid shirts, clean boots. He drove a 2014 Ford F-150 in dark navy blue that he washed himself every Saturday morning. He worked part-time consulting for a veteran transition nonprofit based in Atlanta, helping guys coming out of the service find jobs, housing, purpose. He went in 2 days a week. The other 5 he was on Cedarwood Lane. He had a daughter, Amara, 23, who was finishing her master's in public health at Emory. She called every Sunday. He cooked for those calls, not because she could taste it through the phone, but because cooking made him feel like she was almost there. He was a widower. His wife Denise had passed of ovarian cancer in 2019, 14 months after his retirement. He had planned that retirement around her, around having time, finally, real time, the kind of time the army doesn't give you. They got 14 months. In the backyard, along the fence line, Denise had planted a rose garden the summer before she got sick. 14 bushes, deep red, the color she always wore to church. Marcus kept every one of them alive. That detail matters, remember it. He had one dog, a 2-year-old black German shepherd named Ranger, because of course he did. The neighborhood loved Marcus Webb. He helped the Torres twins with their lawn mower when the blade guard cracked. He checked on Mr. Delaney after storms. He kept his yard clean and his music low and his porch light on. He was the kind of man you were glad lived next door. Unless you were the kind of person who moved into 4414 in April of 2021. The moving truck arrived on a Saturday. A big white commercial truck, Hartwell Premium Relocation, stenciled on the side, which was the first sign that this was not a normal moving situation, followed by a pearl white 2022 Cadillac Escalade with tinted windows and a personalized plate that read, DHRTWELL. Diane Colette Hartwell was 44 years old, real estate developer, or rather, the ex-wife of a real estate developer, which in her mind amounted to the same thing. She had walked away from a 12-year marriage in Buckhead, Atlanta's wealthiest neighborhood, with a settlement that included the Escalade, a beach condo in Destin, and enough liquid cash to buy the house at 4414 Cedarwood Lane outright and still redecorate. She was blonde, highlighted specifically. She wore linen in colors that didn't wrinkle. She had a small dog, a cream-colored Pomeranian named Duchess, who wore a rhinestone collar and was carried more often than she walked. The movers were at it for 6 hours. At hour 3, one of them knocked over a planter near the front walkway by accident. Diane Hartwell docked their tip on the spot and told them, loudly enough for Mrs. Okonkwo across the street to hear, that she expected professionals, not people who needed to be supervised like children. The mover, a man named Terrence, who was 42 and had been doing this job for 16 years, said nothing. Mrs. Okonkwo went inside and called Marcus. Marcus just said, "Let's see." The first red flag, if you're counting, and Marcus Webb always counted, came that same evening. Around 9:30 p.m., a Saturday night in April, Diane Hartwell hosted what she called a settling and gathering with a group of friends who arrived in 3 separate luxury vehicles, parked 2 of them blocking the Webb's driveway and the Hendersons' mailbox, and played music from a Bluetooth speaker on the front porch until 11:45. Marcus didn't call the police. He walked over. He introduced himself, extended his hand. Diane Hartwell looked at his hand, then looked at him, then said in a voice just loud enough for her friends to hear, "I wasn't aware this street had a neighborhood watch." Her friends laughed. Marcus Webb smiled the way you learn to smile after 24 years in places where smiling is just another form of discipline, and said, "It does now. Nice to meet you, Miss Hartwell." He went home, fed Ranger, made a note in the yellow legal pad he kept on the kitchen table. April 17, 2021, 11:45 p.m., first contact. It didn't take long. 3 weeks after Diane Hartwell moved in, Marcus was in his front yard on a Wednesday afternoon, cleaning out the bed of his truck. Ranger was on a long lead tied to the porch post, lying in a patch of sun, half asleep. Diane came out of her front door in gym clothes, Lululemon, head to toe, with Duchess tucked under one arm and her phone in her other hand. She stopped at the edge of her property line and looked at Ranger. "Is that dog contained?" she said, not to Marcus, to her phone like she was reporting something. "Yes, ma'am," Marcus said. "He's on a lead, 20 feet, he can't reach the sidewalk." "I'm going to need you to keep that animal away from my dog," she said. "Duchess has anxiety." "Ranger has a lead," Marcus said. "He's fine." She looked at him for a long moment, the way people look at you when they've decided, before you've spoken a word, that you're going to be a problem. "I'm going to need to know," she said slowly, "if there's going to be issues with you, because I didn't move here to deal with issues." Marcus put down his chamois cloth. He turned to face her fully. "Miss Hartwell," he said, "I've lived on this street for 6 years. I keep my yard clean, my dog contained, and my music low. I'm happy to be a good neighbor. I'd appreciate the same." She didn't respond. She turned and walked back toward her door, then stopped. "That truck," she said, nodding at the F-150, "is it always going to be parked there?" "It's my driveway," Marcus said. "It's an eyesore," she said, and went inside. Marcus picked up his chamois cloth. Went back to work. Made a note that evening. "Now let me pause here and ask you something. Have you ever tried to be reasonable with someone who has already decided you're the enemy? Have you ever offered a handshake and watched someone look at it like it was something you dragged in from outside? Drop a comment. Tell me what that felt like, because I think a lot of you know exactly what I'm describing." The calls to the police started in June. The first one was a Tuesday morning, June 8, 2021. Marcus was washing his truck in his own driveway when a Fairview Heights patrol car pulled slowly up to the curb. 2 officers got out, polite, professional. They said they'd received a call about a suspicious individual in the neighborhood. Marcus showed them his ID, his military ID, his mortgage documents, which he kept a photocopy of in the house for exactly this kind of occasion, because Marcus Webb was the kind of man who had been black in America for 51 years and understood that documentation was not paranoia. It was preparation. The officers ran his plates, confirmed the house was his, apologized, left. Marcus went inside, added a page to the legal pad, included the officers' badge numbers 4471 and 4489 and the incident report number they gave him when he asked for it politely. He installed 2 security cameras the following week, a Ring doorbell camera facing the street, a Wise cam mounted at the corner of his garage, angled to cover his driveway and Diane Hartwell's property line. Call 2 came on June 22nd, a noise complaint. Marcus had been playing jazz from a Bluetooth speaker on his back porch at 7:30 in the evening. He measured the decibel level with a phone app, 62 decibels. City ordinance allowed up to 70 until 10 p.m. He turned it down anyway, made a note, logged the decibel reading. Call 3, July 4th weekend. Diane called to report what she described as illegal fireworks. The Torres twins had sparklers. They were 9 years old. They had sparklers. Call 4, July 19th. Ranger got off his lead somehow. To this day, Marcus isn't sure how, and wandered into Hartwell's yard for approximately 4 minutes before Marcus retrieved him. She called it a vicious animal attack. The responding officer, a young woman named Deputy Priya Nair, looked at Ranger, who was sitting on the lawn with his head tilted, perfectly calm, and then looked at the incident report description and then looked at Marcus and said, very quietly, "Sir, I'm sorry for your time." Marcus thanked her, got her badge number, 6012. She would come back into this story later. By September, the calls were averaging 2 per month. By October, they were weekly. Call 7 was a wellness check. Diane had told the dispatcher she was concerned about erratic behavior from a neighbor. Marcus had been doing pull-ups on a bar he'd mounted in his garage doorway, which you could see from the street. Pull-ups. Call 11 was in November. Diane filed a formal complaint with the Fairview Heights HOA, claiming that Marcus's rose bushes, Denise's rose bushes, were encroaching on the shared fence line by, and I want you to understand this precisely, 4 inches. 4 inches. Marcus had a survey done. The bushes were 18 inches from the property line. He sent the survey to the HOA with a polite cover letter. He kept a copy. He filed it in a manila folder labeled HOA Hartwell Complaint 1. He was already thinking in terms of evidence. Call 14, January 2022, a cold Friday morning. Diane called to report a suspicious vehicle parked on the street. The vehicle was a Emory University campus van that had dropped off Marcus's daughter Amara, who was visiting for the weekend. The van was there for 3 minutes. 3 minutes. Now understand what's happening here. Diane Hartwell was not just making calls, she was escalating each one. She was using different language every time: suspicious, erratic, threatening, volatile. She was trying to build a pattern in someone else's file. she was trying to make Marcus Webb look dangerous on paper. And here is what she did not understand. Marcus Webb had spent 24 years studying how enemies build cases. He'd been trained by the United States Army to think in terms of intelligence, in terms of what gets documented and how and why and what it can be used for later. Every call she made, she thought was a weapon aimed at him. Every call she made, he turned into a brick in the wall he was building around her. The 19th call came on a Thursday in March of 2022. A gray, wet Thursday, the kind of Georgia March that can't decide if it's still winter. Cold rain, heavy enough to blur the windshields of the cars parked on the street. Marcus was at work in Atlanta. His daughter Amara was house-sitting, studying at the kitchen table, Ranger at her feet. At 2:15 in the afternoon, she heard a sound from the backyard, a thud, then a scraping sound, then silence. She looked out the back window. Diane Hartwell was standing in the rose garden. Amara Webb was 23 years old and had never been arrested a day in her life. She was also the daughter of a ranger, which means she had inherited a very specific kind of calm in a crisis. She picked up her phone. She called Marcus. She called Deputy Priya Nair's direct line, which Marcus had written on a notepad by the phone, and then she stood at the back window and recorded everything on her phone without opening the door. What she recorded was this. Diane Hartwell in rain boots and a clear plastic poncho pulling rose bushes out of the ground, not trimming them, not cutting them back, pulling them out, root systems and all, and dropping them over the fence into the shared alley behind the properties. 14 rose bushes. Denise Webb's 14 rose bushes. She got through 11 of them before the patrol car arrived. Marcus was already on heading south when Amara called. He drove the 40 minutes back to Fairview Heights in 31. He does not recommend this. When he turned onto Cedarwood Lane, there was already a patrol car in front of 4414 and another in front of 4410. Neighbors were on their porches. Mrs. Okonkwo had her hand over her mouth. Mr. Delaney was standing in his yard with his arms crossed. Marcus parked, got out of his truck, walked around to the backyard. 3 rose bushes were still in the ground. 11 were gone, piles of dark red petals and torn roots in the mud. He stood there for a long moment. The responding officer, a man named Deputy Carlos Reyes, walked over and told him that Ms. Hartwell was claiming the bushes had been encroaching on her property, and she had a right to remove encroaching vegetation. Marcus asked Deputy Reyes if he'd like to see the survey from November showing the bushes were 18 inches from the property line. He had it on his phone. He'd photographed every document. He also pulled up the security camera footage from the Wise Cam, which had been recording since July, which showed, in 1080p, Diane Hartwell entering the yard from the shared alley gate, not from any point where the bushes could have been touching her property. Deputy Reyes was quiet for a moment. Then he asked Marcus if he would like to file a criminal trespass complaint and a property destruction report. Marcus said yes. Then he walked inside, sat down at his kitchen table, put his hand flat on the yellow legal pad. He didn't cry. He doesn't do that in front of people. But he called Amara from the other room and told her to get her dinner started. He'd be in a few minutes. And Amara Webb, who knew exactly what those roses meant, who had helped her mother plant every single one of them, just said, "Take your time, Daddy. And if you think Marcus Webb is going to let this go, you have never met a man like Marcus Webb." Now here's what nobody knew at the time. Here's what Diane Hartwell's, with her Escalade and her HOA complaints and her 19 phone calls, did not know about the quiet man in the navy blue F-150 next door. She did not know that before his final assignment before retirement, Marcus Webb had spent 4 years attached to the Army's Criminal Investigation Division as a senior consultant on financial fraud cases involving military contractors. He knew how federal investigations were built. He knew what evidence looked like when it was properly cataloged. He knew how to make a prosecutor's job easy. She did not know that his closest friend from his Ranger days, a man named Staff Sergeant retired Darius Pittman, who had served with Marcus in Afghanistan and gotten out in 2012, had gone to law school on the GI Bill, passed the Georgia bar in 2015, and was now a civil litigation attorney in Atlanta with a specialty in racial harassment and civil rights law. Darius Pittman had been following this case since call number 6. He had in fact been waiting for call 19. Because here is what Darius Pittman understood that Diane Hartwell did not. There is a legal doctrine in Georgia and in federal civil rights law that deals with what happens when a pattern of false police reports is used to target a specific individual based on their race. It is not just embarrassing. It is not just a civil matter. When you can demonstrate a pattern, documented, time-stamped, recorded, of false emergency calls designed to subject a black homeowner to repeated law enforcement contact for the purpose of harassment or intimidation, you are in the territory of criminal false report filings, potential federal civil rights violations, and a civil lawsuit that, with 19 documented incidents, 3 years of camera footage, 6 officer testimonies, HOA correspondence, a property survey, and 1 very clear backyard video of a woman destroying someone's garden in a rain poncho, would not be hard to win. Darius had also done something Marcus didn't know about until February of 2022. He had filed a public records request with the Fairview Heights Police Department for every call made from the address 4414 Cedarwood Lane since April 2021. The records came back 19 calls, all from the same number, all targeting the address 4410. Darius had sent copies to the Fairview County District Attorney's Office in January. They had opened a file. And there was one more thing. One thing Marcus Webb had discovered entirely by accident in October of 2021 when he was reviewing his property documents for the HOA survey. The shared fence between 4410 and 4414 Cedarwood Lane, the fence Diane Hartwell had used as her basis for claiming the rose bushes were encroaching, was built in 2015 by the previous owner of 4414, at a cost the previous owner had never formally documented with the county. Which meant it had never been surveyed, which meant it had been built 2 feet into Marcus Webb's property. The fence was illegally placed on his land. He'd known since October. He had said nothing. He had just waited. The morning of the 20th call was a Thursday in April 21st, 2022. Exactly 1 year and 4 days after Diane Hartwell had moved to Cedarwood Lane. The weather was clear and cold, 53 degrees at 7 a.m., the sky that particular shade of early spring blue that makes everything look clean. Marcus was on his porch at 6:45 with his coffee, the yellow legal pad on his knee. He watched Diane Hartwell come out onto her porch at 7:02, her phone already in her hand. He watched her make the call, the one she'd made 19 times before, reporting a suspicious individual on Cedarwood Lane. He opened his legal pad to a fresh page. Wrote the number 20. Then he went inside and called Darius. She made the call, he said. Darius said, "We're ready." At 7:48 a.m., 3 vehicles turned onto Cedarwood Lane. The first was a Fairview Heights Police Department patrol car, Deputy Priya Nair at the wheel, responding to the call from 4414. The second was a dark gray Ford Explorer driven by an investigator from the Fairview County District Attorney's Office. The third was a white Chevy Suburban with Darius Pittman in the passenger seat and a process server named Gerald Howell in the back. They parked, got out, walked to the door of 4414 Cedarwood Lane. Deputy Nair knocked. Diane Hartwell opened the door in a silk robe, coffee in hand, Duchess tucked under her elbow. She looked at the group on her porch and her face went through about 4 different expressions in 2 seconds. Deputy Nair identified herself and informed Ms. Hartwell that she was there in response to Ms. Hartwell's call, and also to serve her with a formal criminal complaint for filing 19 false police reports, a misdemeanor under Georgia Code Section 1626, with potential felony enhancement given the documented pattern and federal civil rights implications currently under review by the DA's office. The DA's investigator handed her a document. Gerald Howell handed her another document, the civil suit filed by Darius Pittman on behalf of Marcus Elijah Webb, seeking damages for intentional infliction of emotional distress, racial harassment, property destruction, and tortious interference. The amount listed on the cover page was $1,240,000. Diane Hartwell looked at the documents. Then she looked past them across the lawn to where Marcus Webb was sitting on his porch. Still in his canvas chair, still with his coffee. He wasn't watching, he was reading the legal pad, adding a note. The fence, let's talk about the fence. At 10:15 that same morning, a county surveyor arrived on Cedarwood Lane with documentation Marcus had submitted in February. By noon, orange survey flags marked the actual property line 2 feet east of where the fence stood. By 1 p.m., a county code enforcement officer had issued a notice of violation to 4414 Cedarwood Lane. The fence had to come down, within 30 days, at Hartwell's expense. By 3 p.m., Darius Pittman had added a supplemental count to the civil suit for encroachment and unpermitted construction. Mr. Delaney stood in his front yard the whole afternoon and watched. At one point he walked over to Marcus's porch, sat down in the other chair, and didn't say anything for a long time. Then he said, "Son, I have lived on this street since 1987. I have never been more proud of this block than I am right now." Marcus said, "How you want your coffee, Mr. Delaney?" "Black," said Mr. Delaney. "Only way there is," said Marcus. The street went quiet after that, the particular quiet that comes after something big has broken open and the air needs time to settle. Diane Hartwell did not come outside for 4 days. When she did, she wore sunglasses and kept her eyes down. Her usual group of luxury vehicles stopped coming. The front porch gatherings stopped. Even Duchess, carried out for her morning walk, seemed to understand that the time for rhinestone color theatrics had passed. The neighbors didn't say much to her, not because they were cruel, but because there are things that don't require comment. There are outcomes that the street simply observes together in silence, and everyone understands what it means. Mrs. Okonkwo left a bag of collard greens on Marcus's porch in May. She left one on Mr. Delaney's too. She did not leave one at 4414. Diane Hartwell's real estate attorney contacted Darius Pittman in late April to discuss a potential settlement. The initial offer was $180,000. Darius told them to try again. The counter was $420,000. Darius told them he'd be in court in September. They called back in June. The settlement was reached in July of 2022. The final figure, including attorney's fees, property restoration costs, and compensatory damages, $875,000. $875,000. Paid to Sergeant First Class Marcus Elijah Webb, United States Army Rangers, retired. The criminal false report charges resulted in a conviction on 17 of the 19 counts. Diane Hartwell received a suspended sentence, 2 years of probation, mandatory community service, and a permanent restraining order prohibiting her from initiating any contact, including law enforcement contact, with Marcus Webb. The fence came down in May. Marcus hired a crew. He watched them work from his porch. The moving truck arrived at 4414 Cedarwood Lane on the second Saturday of August 2022. It was a regular moving truck this time, no company logo on the side. Nobody on Cedarwood Lane came out to watch. Nobody waved. Now let me tell you what happened after. Diane Hartwell moved to a condominium complex in Dunwoody. She sold the Escalade 18 months later. The Destin Beach condo went on the market in early 2023. The divorce settlement, it turned out, had been more generous than her attorneys and not generous enough for the life she'd been trying to live. Last anyone checked, she was working in property management, entry-level, in an office building in Marietta. Deputy Priya Nair, badge number 6012, the one who'd apologized to Marcus about Ranger and the so-called vicious animal attack, was promoted to detective in late 2022. She cited the Webb case in her service record, not the resolution of it, the documentation of it, the meticulous way it had been built, call by call, page by page, date by date. She said it taught her something about what proper evidence collection looks like. Darius Pittman used a portion of his fees from the Webb case to establish a legal fund for Black homeowners in Georgia facing documented patterns of neighbor-initiated police harassment. The fund has handled 11 cases since 2022. Marcus used a portion of the settlement to establish a college fund for the Torres twins, the 9-year-old lawn mowers with the sparklers. They're 13 now. They've already started looking at engineering programs. He donated another portion to the nonprofit where he consults, funding 10 additional veteran transition slots for the year. And in the fall of 2022, October, the way Denise always loved it, the light going golden in the afternoons and the smell of wood smoke coming from somewhere down the block, Marcus Webb went to the nursery on Route 9 and bought 14 bare root rose canes. Deep red, the color Denise always wore to church. He planted them himself, all 14, along the back fence line. Took him most of a Saturday. Ranger supervised from a sunny spot by the gate. By the following June, all 14 were blooming. You see, some things you just have to wait for. I want to close with something. Not a lecture, not a speech, just a thing worth sitting with. There is a certain kind of person in this world who looks at a man like Marcus Webb, a man who is quiet, who is measured, who keeps his yard clean and his music low and his dog on a lead, and sees something to push against, something to diminish. They see the stillness and mistake it for weakness. They see the patience and mistake it for submission. They don't see the 24 years, they don't see the titanium plate, they don't see the legal pad. And they certainly don't see what a man who spent 24 years in the United States Army Rangers understands about patience. Patience isn't waiting, patience is preparation, patience is documentation, patience is knowing that the moment will come and being ready for it when it does. Marcus Webb didn't make 19 calls. He answered 19 calls. And the 20th one, that one he made himself. Not to the police, to his friend Darius, to the district attorney, to the surveyor, to a system he had learned brick by brick, call by call, page by page, to operate with precision. Here's what I want you to take with you today. You can harass a man, you can file false reports, you can pull up his late wife's roses in the rain and think you've won something. But you cannot outlast a man who has already survived the things Marcus Webb survived. You cannot intimidate a man who has already decided, long ago, that his dignity is not up for negotiation. Never mistake a quiet man for a weak man. Never mistake patience for permission. And never ever call the police on a man who is documenting every single call. Because one day, that documentation is going to walk into a courtroom. And you're going to be on the wrong side of it. Thanks for being here today. If this story moved you, if it made you think, or if you've got your own story about standing your ground against a neighbor who thought they could break you, drop it in the comments. I read every single one. And if you're new here, welcome to the channel. Hit subscribe. There are more stories coming, every one of them true in the ways that matter. Take care of yourselves and each other. This story is inspired by real events and public court records. Names, locations, and specific details have been changed or dramatized for storytelling purposes. Any resemblance to real individuals is coincidental.